Howdy, folks. It is I, the Solo Gamer, continuing on with this week's collection of retro games. And this one's a little bit of a personal nostalgia trip. Anyone who's familiar with the fighting game world knows about SNK, knows about Fatal Fury, and knows that it has usually been a 2D fighting series. But there was, for a short time during the PS1's era, an effort to do a 3D fighting game. And this is the one that was the initial creation. And this is Wild Ambition. Fatal Fury, Wild Ambition. And essentially, for lack of a better term, it's kind of a retelling of the original Fatal Fury story. Which, if you've never played the original Fatal Fury or seen the OVA, basically Terry and Andy's foster dad gets killed by geese, and they basically go on a revenge tour. Joe joins up, and everybody else here is either an ally or an adversary. We'll start with Joe, who's always been one of my favorites. And in many ways, you can see where this was kind of a... This was kind of in that weird early era.
Joe versus Zhang Fei. Round 1. Fight.
And now, one thing I do want to note, there is no analog support for this, which is another case of a missed opportunity, because this game could have definitely benefited from it. But other than the lack of that, it's a fairly competently done 3D fighting game for its era. And to be fair, it was actually pretty impressive visually. The backgrounds are a little static. I mean, let's face it, they're very basic. One good thing about this is all of the games have a full menu list for all the movesets, which is very handy. They all have super moves, special moves. But the game is not a particularly unique game of its era. It fell along right inside that same era of like Street Fighter EX Alpha and all that. It was, for its time, pretty cool. But it wasn't. But it was still sort of an early experiment when stuff like Real Bout Fatal Fury was going to be coming out and all that kind of jazz. And then, of course, the Fatal Fury series itself would be eclipsed by King of Fighters, which took all the various independent Fatal Fury and King of Fighters and all that stuff and made them independent games all into one. Now you can tell when this game was made because of his existence, because he didn't show up till like the third game, I don't think. So this was at least, well, I mean, let's check. It was 1999. This is right before the next generation was about to roll out. So it came along right at the end game of the PlayStation era. Doesn't change the fact that it was a honestly impressively good game for its era. I can just figure out the super moves. It also will show you what your super moves, your regular punch, kick, special, and dodge are. And you can set up special moves in the game if you want. But I will say that this game does have the typical issue with it has the typical issue that was common for the SNK fighting game genre, in that the super moves were an absolute pain in the rear to pull off. Now, thankfully, Joe's fairly easy as a character, so learning him is not hard. But the game itself is rudimentary to it, almost a fault. Now, back then, this was before SNK started to get all sissified and began to really lose a lot of track on what was its fan base. So as you can tell, Mai is incredibly well endowed, as she very much should be. That being said, she does have some of that Tomb Raider going on with them semi-pointy boobs, but I mean, this was a time when this series was finally starting to really hit its stride and figure out what it was going to be. But yeah, as you can see, she bounces like Jello. But the game is, for lack of a better term, it is absolutely one of the better games in the era, especially for like 3D fighters, which were still coming into their own at the time. This was before it really took off. But yeah, like this game was unique in that it was a very good game. Very difficult though. Even on easy difficulty, the later fights become a very difficult battle because, like a lot of the games at the time, the AI for this was kind of basic and was prone to cheating. There it is, Turbulence Upper. And almost every character has at least two supers. Joe has the basic Screw Upper, which is just the big Hurricane Uppercut, and then Turbulence is that massive combo. But yeah, as you can see, the game is an excellent example of the kind of fighting games that were becoming more and more popular at the time. And then you would get stuff like Guys, or the Bushido Blades, or Bloody Roar, or Battle Ryoto Shinden, which were also very early 3D fighting games. And they were a very eclectic bunch with all kinds of weirdness. And of course, the granddaddy of all of the weird 3D fighting games that were going down at the time, Street Fighter EX Alpha. Now, I don't know if I've talked about this before, I might have, but if I have, I don't recall. But this was right in Capcom's semi-golden age when they were really just like rocking on all cylinders. Resident Evil, Street Fighter. And they were also being incredibly experimental. Capcom also had done, at this point, Rival Schools, I believe. Yeah, 1997. They had done Rival Schools by this point. Or at least I think they did. But it was around this time that they wound up doing Rival Schools. And this was, for lack of a better term, this was their first real effort to make a 3D Street Fighter. And one of the big things they tried to do was they tried to put both traditional characters and new characters. So you've got Ryu, you've got Ken, you've got Chun-Li, but then you have D-Dark, you have Guile, you have Skullomania, you got Kairi, Alan, Blair, Darun, Akuma, Bison, Garuda, who's the boss, I think, Sakura, Polum, C-Jack, and so forth. And like Alan, if I'm not mistaken, isn't he like... Yeah, Alan Schneider. He's like a dude who was supposed to be like a martial arts champion, and then Ken whooped his ass. Just straight out humiliated him. And now he's obsessed with proving that he's as strong as Ken. So he's essentially just a Shoto clone. He has a few unique moves of his own, but for the most part, his fighting style is essentially just a carbon copy of Ken. Now, I don't recall, does this one have analog? No, it does not. Another case in which I think a lot of these games could have massively benefited by having analog here. Now, that being said, even on the easiest mode, this game was admittedly punishingly difficult because the effort to integrate 3D effect into the game gave it a bit of a different style to it, but it still played like a mostly 2D fighting game, which made it feel very distinct. Oh yeah, Sakura and her dance moves. A direct rip from her Street Fighter Alpha. And like every other game, this game does have a full-on, just straight-up menu system. Yeah. Now in him, you can kind of see what they would eventually do with Makoto, where she actually has a completely unique fighting style. But he was kind of built to be like a counterpart to Ken, where he was going to be Ken's, nemesis, and it never caught on. Never was gonna, but I mean, no fault for trying, I suppose. But what made him unique is that he did things a little differently from Ryu or Ken, which made him stand out. But all his moves are just variations on Ken or Ryu's themes. And in a weird way, he's kind of a Dan, almost. Not to the same extent, because Dan is meant to be a straight-out joke character. But he is more meant to be he's meant to more be like a straight-up counterpoint to Ken with a little bit of a varied moveset. Another wonderful example of how the fighting game genre was kind of in upheaval at this point, because the game, it had hit big with Street Fighter 2. It had run-on success with Mortal Kombat and other Street Fighters that followed in its wake. But what had separated all of them was they were all 2D. They were all either, as you might imagine, they were either the Mortal Kombat, the absolutely legendary Mortal Kombat, actors who were who were made into the characters using digitization, or it was 2D sprite work. This was the first real attempt I remember, where they were really trying to do a proper 3D Street Fighter clone, and the end result was honestly not bad, but I don't think anybody was ever going to buy that this was ever going to be a replacement for the proper Street Fighter. And I think a lot of that boils down to the fact that the games, aside from the lack of characters, which, to be fair, it had a fair deal, but it was starting to fall behind already with some games having way more. Mortal Kombat 2 and 3 being good examples of where eventually the roster would just go insane. But what made the game stand out was that it had unique characters that had never been in a Street Fighter game before. And that unique feature of characters that were completely unlike your average Street Fighter characters made it stand out at a time when Street Fighter was competing with Mortal Kombat and games like it. It had neat visual effects. The backgrounds were well designed, if somewhat boring due to the stack, but like everything about the game was just Street Fighter in 3D with some extra characters. An excellent attempt to improve over previous existence, but you can tell it was near the end of that lifespan, because if you go to something like Rival Schools, that was within 1 year of each other. So it was right before Rival Schools. So within a year of Rival Schools, this had been out, and this was out a year before Rival Schools hit out. And of course, then you've got something like Soul Blade, which started the Soul series proper, and is, some people still consider it one of the better iterations of the Soul series in the video game history. It also notably has the greatest intro in the Soul series by a mile. If you love video game music, check out Little V Mill's version of this. It's amazing. God. Bandai Namco could never make this game today because they're too goddamn pussyfied. They had to bring in outside characters in Tekken to get some sex appeal back. How sad is that? And they had to be bullied into putting their character models right after several of their female characters came out looking like men. It is notable, in the original Japanese, she's naked. Like, she's not wearing clothes in that intro, and they actually added it for the international release. So even back then, they were editing their content. But Soul Blade is routinely considered one of the best games of its era, and in many ways is often considered it's often considered one of the best games from the PS1 time frame. as far as fighting games were concerned. It's absolutely one of my all-time favorites. Siegfried. And back in the arcade, Li Long was always my go-to because I loved, at the time I had a huge hang-up on nunchucks. I loved how nunchucks could just be, you know, they just hit you from every bloody direction, which made them very good. But this game was one of the first truly 3D fighters in its era. It included ring outs, and while the backgrounds were, by nature, very basic, they did the job and they were well enough for what they needed to be. And you can also tell, like, they really... I often think they rushed the... I often joke that they rushed the localization out to try and get it on the store shelves in time. Because I think they wanted it for like a... I think it might have been for like a holiday season, but I don't remember. But you can tell, like, they already knew where they were heading with this. They had the movesets, they had the techniques, they had the gameplay style. It was all very clear where they were going with this. And it would not be long before they figured out... When they figured out, like, how they were going to turn what had been a shock hit into the juggernaut that became Soul Calibur. And then Soul Calibur would just continue on. And the Gears of Madness. Okay, I have to say, I gotta wonder who it was who decided to do Voldo, because someone at Bandai Namco said, we need more characters. We want to include a guy who uses Indian guitar as a weapon. How do we make that weird? Bondage gear? Brilliant. Cut, print, put it to paper. Like, I'm sorry, I look at this and all I can think of is someone was into a certain fetish and could not figure out how to make it fit in the game without it just coming off as weird, and so they just said, okay, let's run with it. To be fair, the guitar are one of the coolest weapons in history. But these aren't the traditional... Well, no, they are a type of guitar, but they aren't the traditional guitar. The traditional guitar was a single-bladed, heavily armored punch dagger that a lot of the use for it was designed to actually strike through chainmail armor, which was kind of the standard armor of that era.
The grueling battle ended with the victory. You win.
To be fair, you have to be an absolute insane master of your craft to wield the bladed nunchucks. It's like in, what's it called? Ninja Gaiden, the Vigorian Flail. Every time I play that game, that's my favorite weapon. But where in the hell does Ryu learn how to use those things? Because he should be cutting his own arms off half the time. One of the things I always loved about this game was that, unlike Street Fighter, where it was all about special moves and trying to, footsie your opponent, this game was all about understanding your specific fighting style and timing, and then just knowing which way to strike at your enemy. Knowing the moves helped, but you could still be effective even if you were just a button basher if you had the right timing. Now, I was pretty good with Li Long back in my heyday, and Maxi and the other nunchuck wielders down the road after that. But like it's all about timing and pressure rather than fireballs and Hadoukens and Shurikens. Now there are special moves, there are certain special techniques, and knowing how to use them is, a critical part of it.
Fight.
But you can still win through just basic game knowledge in this instance. Later games would require a lot more mechanical stability, but like this game was one of the first. This game was the first one, and it was strangely the most noob friendly at the time. Later iterations would have much greater mechanical depth and complexity. This game was much simpler. Siegfried. Siegfried was my other main, mostly because I loved big sword dude. Like any guy with super big sword was big on me. And the funny thing was, this was before I knew who Guts was. It was like once I learned who Guts was and realized the connections for the character, that just amplified it. And later on, he would be my primary main in later Soul Calibur games. But yeah, as you can see, the game definitely has, even as old as it is, it's definitely aged well, and I feel like it's one of those games that's gonna continue to be an absolute, legend in the long term. Of course, you've got other stuff like the old WWF arcade games, which were, honestly, they were interesting, but they weren't great in a practical sense. Like, I'd be the first to tell you, they were like someone tried to mix Mortal Kombat and and Street Fighter plus digitized WWE wrestlers and make a fighting game out of it, and it didn't work. It really didn't work. Like it was fun in a button mashy sort of chaotic way, but it wasn't anything close to like an actual like fighting game. And I say that as someone who loved the old WWE. It was a fun game, and I picked up a copy cheap because I liked it. But like in the arcades, it was a waste because you would just pump so much quarters into it. But this is the last game I'm going to be demonstrating today, and this is Kensai Sacred Fist. And Kensai Sacred Fist was one of these weird efforts from Japan to, it was a Konami-made game published in 1998, right around the same time Street Fighter EX came out. And the whole deal with this was, it was essentially trying to be like Konami's variant of Tekken, but it had a completely different control scheme, which I admit I have not played in years. But you have two attacks. You have the punches, the kicks. You have a defensive block, kind of like DOA, actually, which is another game we'll get to. And then you have a grapple. Now here's the thing, you have to block. There's no auto blocking in this. So if you aren't blocking, you're going to get hit regardless. Which is what makes that such a great feature, is that the block also acts as an auto counter if it comes in at the same angle. So let's say I do that. As long as I'm blocking high and the attack comes high, I auto defend against it. But if I'm not blocking low, it still catches me. The other side of the coin is grabs will punch right through it. So it's all about countering and blocking, which makes it feel much more like an actual martial arts fight rather than just a straight out brawl or a super powered beatdown. But I always found this game fascinating at a real practical level because it required you to completely change how you played, depending upon who your opponent was and what their fighting style was. Like, her whole deal is she's all about like quick strikes and grapples. So you can either rush her down and overpressure her, or you can try and bait her into attacks, make her come at you, and then counter her with a throw. Now, granted, in lower difficulties, the fights aren't too difficult. But notice how she went low because my block was high, and then caught me right through. You can also recover from trip-ups and knockdowns. And like 80% of the game is just head games with your opponent. Trying to make them guess what you're going to do next. Uppercut. Bonk. But each character is very unique. There's tons of characters to unlock. And every character plays it a little bit differently. Like Douglas is a straight up brawler who uses a sort of kung fu-esque martial art. But you notice that a lot of his hits are all about straight chopping and hitting. He's trying to break you. See? And then hard hitting, fast attack, sort of old school kung fu shit. But then he has grapples that he'll also try to use on you too. See? There's them grapples again. But then I take him down with those nice spinning kicks and he's on his ass. Now using different directions changes how you maneuver. So this game really boils down to timing and attack selection. See, he stopped my low charge, so I switched up to the high chop and then just moved in on him. Once you understand a character's moveset, the base moves are all the same. Like David's the straight out brawler, grappler, heavy hitter, wrestler. He's essentially base from DOA. He's slow, but if he lands hits, you will take a crap ton of damage. See? He also has a lot of down moves and a lot of solid grapple maneuvers. But see, now you notice he's starting to recognize the moves I'm using in my patterns, and he's changing up his attacks to counteract me. More strikes, less grapples, harder hitting blows, trying to get me to lose my grip so that I won't be able to counteract him. Can't win, but I got him. But they're all super diverse and all super unique. Like, Alan is a street brawler. He's not like a proper martial artist in the traditional sense. He's all about like them heavy punches, them back elbows, landing them heavy hits on you and knocking you down. He's also got really good range with them arms for some reason. I don't know how his arms can outrange my kicks, but he does. He's also wicked fast. Beating him usually boils down to counteracting his attacks and then landing a good solid combo or counter to knock him down. He's tough. But it usually is just a matter of recognizing the patterns he's using and then getting around it. One second. Yeah. I always found this game incredibly interesting because it plays a lot differently than what I anticipated. It feels like someone took the concept of Tekken, mixed in a little bit of DOA, but didn't have any licenses to attach to it, so they had to create an entire roster all of their own. Yeah, see? I was countering and blocking his attack, so he suddenly switched up to using the got him with that 2 kicker, but I didn't follow it through. Got him. He's hard, but like the later fights are all difficult anyway. And is supposed to be like the Sarah Bryant of the game. If she's meant to mimic anybody, I think she's supposed to mimic Sarah Bryant from Virtua Fighter. She also does kind of remind me of like the early renders of Samus Aran from like the early 3D Metroid tests. But hair's not long enough. But yeah, the game's got some pretty neat backgrounds. It's got a solid combat engine. Has decent mechanics that stand out from the crowd at the time. And plays well beyond anything I would have anticipated in and of itself. The one thing I do think that it could have done better was be a little bit more user-friendly in its combat systems. They're a little unintuitive if you're a Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat fan. If you're a DOA fan, it'll feel very, very much at home. I will say, the backgrounds, while simple, are pretty good. They kind of remind me of like Psychic Force. Though not nearly as active as the Psychic Force backgrounds. They do feel like a similar vibe, like that sort of, you know, each level has its own sort of theme and background to it. But yeah, I definitely think like if you're into fighting games, the PS1 has such a wide array of unique and unusual, just straight up madness in it. Games like Kensai are great examples where you could find a lot of really fun gameplay out of this, and it's great for multiplayer if you have a couple of extra controllers available. See, perfect counter. If you time your counter with just the right amount of timing on the attack, you can actually directly physically counter it with a throw. But it takes way better timing than the auto defense does, which can make it very difficult. So that takes a lot more practice. But yeah, Saya. Saya is supposed to be the tomboy character, and her fighting style is a mix of like traditional karate and what's her name, Jia Yu from Tekken. Like she definitely has a feel like she has a bit of that in her, and a bit of Makoto in her. See, but she definitely isn't. But she definitely has some tricks of her own that make her stand apart. That being said, she's definitely supposed to be like the daddy's girl martial artist that you see in a lot of different games. But yeah, like it's definitely one of the better fighting games on the market from its era. And Yugo is the straight up Kazuya Ryu clone. Just no fireballs this time. But otherwise, he's designed to be like the Kazuya Ryu copy. The dedicated martial arts master. And he fights like it. Like, you see a lot of Kazuya and Ryu's fighting style, definitely in his moveset. But he is the intro character. He is the Shotokan of this game in all but name. And that's not to say he's bad. Like he uses a very, very distinct style, but I mean, he is what he is. And I definitely recommend, like, if you're a big fan of fighting games, Kensai is definitely on the list. But it's one of those cases where there's so much variety on the PlayStation that there's tons to get around. The Dragon Ball games, Guys, God Bless the Ring, Elemental Gearbolt. I mentioned this earlier. Like, this is one of the weirdest goddamn games I've ever played. It's a rail shooter. It's a House of the Dead. And yet, at the same time, it is undeniably... pardon me. Is undeniably one of those games that I think a lot of people were shocked at. Just it has a very anime aesthetic. It has very, very clear fan service. I mean, you cannot argue that. But it was unique for its era. But the PlayStation was, of course, a goldmine of weird esoteric nonsense back in the day. Much like its 16-bit counterparts, they were always experimenting with stuff, and there was a lot of really good stuff on the Saturn too. The Real Bout Fatal Fury series, Street Fighter, Virtua Fighter, Night Warriors, well, Vampire Hunter. Even a couple of even the version of Crusader No Remorse, Darius, Daytona, and of course Dead or Alive. So, but I definitely think it's worth looking into if you're a retro games collector, to check out the PlayStation, the Saturn, the Sega CD, and the 32X have their own compilations, but they're much more limited. And then of course there's the Genesis, which had its fair share. And then of course the Super Nintendo is where, like, arguably you could make the argument that the Super Nintendo was the best. You could argue that was the most, successful console. You could also argue it was one of the most widely developed for consoles in the gaming space, with everything from arcade ports and stuff like that to its own unique one-offs: Yoshi's Island, Mario Kart, Super Tennis, to the Peacekeepers and UN Squadron. This system had an absolute unending cavalcade of games for it. And then of course there's the Nintendo, which, if you're into old school 8-bit, awesomeness, the 8-bit era was really Nintendo's era. I mean, you could argue the Master System, but I mean, let's be real. It was an effort, but it was never able to quite match Nintendo's reputation, especially in the West. Now, overseas, different story, but anyway, we're going to call it a night here, but I definitely think that if you're looking for retro gaming systems, the Polymega is still my recommendation. It is hands down the single best platform in the market. Yep, so you've got the latest version of the software when it comes to all of the sort of old school martial arts, arcade copy overs. Like they made a literal Sailor Moon fighting game on the Saturn, and like, it's actually good. Like, no joke, it is honestly damn good. They made an RPG on this. They made a beat 'em up on the Super Famicom, which I have. They made a beat 'em up on. They also copied it over to the Genesis, which, no surprise there. But every single game that was being made at the time, almost all of them in one way or another, wound up on the Super Nintendo, and then for the more esoteric stuff, it would go to stuff like, the PC Engine with Devil Hunter Oko, or Galaxy Fraulein Yuna, which these were all PC Engine games, and they were all typically RPGs or visual novels. But this was the golden era of insanity, when everything was on the table. It's not like it is today, where the gaming industry is much more reserved. At the same time pouring endless amounts of money into, some major, $400 million boondoggle like Concord. Well, and then it gets its absolute shit rocked by a bunch of indies. But there's a lot to be said about the fact that at the end of the day, the gaming industry was going through a huge, unparalleled upheaval. And this is one of the places you can find pretty much all of it in one location. Ooh, Desert Fighter, still need to get that one. Dolphin, Echo the Dolphin, Yu Yu Hakusho. I actually had this. I had this game once upon a time and I lost it. Ugh. So much frustration. But definitely, if you're into it, check out the PC engine capacity. The capacity for this game to run every CD-ROM game system ever, and you can pick the modules you want to add, like the Super Nintendo or the Genesis, on your own accord and buy them independently, and then you can just buy the ones you think are good. Either way, I definitely recommend the Polymega as a system for retro game collection. It's pricey, ain't gonna lie, but end of the day, you're probably gonna get your money's worth and then some with just one or two modules, because the sheer number of games you can collect with this is going to be absolutely phenomenal. And I do think that long term, you're going to probably see a lot of the old school games eventually make their way to the Polymega as add-on games or separate game DVDs, which is something they're doing right now. So definitely worth looking into. I'm actually going to try and get my hands on a couple of those so I can demonstrate how those work as well. But either way, this is the Solo Gamer, and I will catch you all next time. With that being said, I don't know how this is all going to pan out because my schedules are going to be changing in the near future. So I will probably be recording still, just maybe not as frequently, or maybe not all at once like I currently do. We'll see. Either way, Solo Gamer will see you next time. Signing out. You all take care now, you hear?